I want to make you uncomfortable. Hey everyone, Pastor Tim here with this week's update from Mercy Church. Every week we talk about loving God, loving others, and making disciples. I want to add in a fourth topic today, which is what's happening in the Middle East, and I want to share a couple thoughts on that. Let me start off with this idea of loving God and making you uncomfortable. Now, I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable just for the sake of discomfort. I want to make you uncomfortable because I want to press a little bit here, okay? When we talk about loving God, we're talking about growing our relationship with God. Around this time of year, after we've been existing as Mercy Church for coming up on 1 year, it can be easy for us to start getting lackadaisical about our spiritual growth. Loving God is about us growing with Him, and one of the ways we do that is by gathering together for Sunday service and being involved in a small group. And it can be easy to start making excuses, honestly, to start being like, well, I'll get to small group when I get a chance, and I'll come to Sunday when I get a chance, but I got this going on and this going on. Friends, if we start to become comfortable with coming up with reasons, sometimes excuses, if we're honest, about not being engaged, we can start to set a trend in our life where our spiritual life becomes weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker, and we become comfortable with not really walking closely with God. So I want to push you lovingly, but I want to push you nonetheless. Be invested, be involved. Get to small group if you're involved with a small group. Get to Sunday service. We want to see you there. It's not for scoring points with Jesus, but it's to help one another grow with God. Now, when it comes to loving others, I just want to say thank you to everybody who donated canned goods for the New Market Food Pantry. 5 full bins of food and a little bit of overflow even from that will be delivered to them this week. So thank you for your generosity in doing that. When it comes to making disciples, I want to invite you again to our Disciple Makers Initiative. It's November 4th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's being held at Durham Evangelical Church in Durham, which is just maybe 2 or 3 miles up the road, maybe a little bit more, 3 or 4 miles up the road from New Market. They're just the place we're meeting. They're not in charge of it. They're just giving us a place to meet very generously. But it's a full day to talk about how do we invest in others to help them grow in their spiritual walk. On Sunday, I challenged folks to think about who invested in you to help you grow spiritually, and what would it look like if you became that kind of person who's investing in somebody else to help them grow spiritually. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to answer some of those hard questions. We're going to talk about how do we share the gospel. We're going to talk about how do we walk with somebody to help them grow spiritually. So if you'd like to come to that, email us, info@mercychurchnh.com. Again, it's November 4th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Lunch is provided. And if you have dietary restrictions, please let us know when you shoot us an email. Now, with all those things said, I want to speak about the goings-on in the Middle East right now. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, one of the things I think we should do in these situations is be slow to over-respond or to speak overly confidently when it is an extremely complicated situation. Now, let me say something here. When I say it's complicated, I don't mean that everything about it is complicated. There are things that are clearly atrocities. There are things when innocent women, children, citizens are being killed. That is a bad thing. That grieves the heart of God. Death grieves the heart of God, period. So we can look at situations happening over in the Middle East right now and say, that is bad. There are some clear black and white things. But I do want to note here that the Middle East has been a complicated area for all of human history. And so it can be easy for us to watch 1 or 2 things on the internet or to read one article and then go, hey, I'm going to definitively state this is exactly how everybody should think about the Middle East. I would just encourage you to be slow in doing so. I'm not saying that there aren't things that are black and white, but I think we got to be slow in responding to the situation. I've heard scholars and theologians over the years realize that their area of expertise is theology. It's scripture. It's not international affairs. And so I just think that's wise. I just think there's a degree of wisdom there to not overstate our case when we might not know that much. Now, I just want to get right to the point, because for a lot of people, when they heard about what's going on, particularly when they think of Israel, they say, is this a sign of the end times? Is this the end of the world? So let me say a couple things to that. First off, let us remember that Jesus Christ himself said he doesn't know when the end is. When he was in his human state on this earth, he had, according to Philippians 2, given up his full control of all his godly sovereignty and authority. So he said only the Father knows the times and exactly when the end is going to come around. So I would always say, if Jesus isn't totally sure, then let's not overstate our case there. The second thing I want to state is that how we see the end times is often very influenced by a handful of passages, the Olivet Discourse, some passages when Paul writes to the church at Thessalonica, and also what's written in Revelation. So depending on one's perspective on those key passages or key sections of Scripture, that'll influence how we see the end times. I do just want to say that if you're a follower of Jesus, having our eyes aware and open to see what's going on is very important. That being said, the other side of the coin is to say, it can be easy to say, well, there's earthquakes happening, and there's wars happening, and there's famines, and that's exactly what Jesus said. That's true. However, I want us to remember that we live in a time in the history of the world where we are constantly getting new information about tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. It is quite possible, and probably even likely, that tragic things like earthquakes and famines and wars have been happening throughout history in large volume, but because we didn't have the internet and weren't able to see everything going on in the world, we didn't know they were going on. So if 250, 350, 1,000 years ago, the internet was available, people back then might have been saying, oh, this is the end of the world because all these things are happening. So all that to say, I again want to encourage us to be slow to jumping in and saying, I know this is the end times. This is absolutely the end times. Could it be? Absolutely. Do I think it is? I'm not really leaning in that direction. I'm telling you, for me. Could I be wrong? Absolutely as well. Here's the main thing I want to press us toward, and I want to do it by sharing a story with you. Years ago, I was leading a Bible study with a group of students, and we got done with that study, and I said, what do you guys want to study next? And everybody said, Revelation, let's study Revelation. I said, it's a pretty heavy book. I don't know that you're going to like it that much. No, let's read it. We got about 8, 9 chapters in, and they were like, can we stop? This is really heavy. So with that said, as I took them into those first opening chapters of Revelation, I said, okay, let's talk about the key ideas here and what we can clearly glean versus things that we're not totally sure about. And one of the themes that runs through it, the whole book of Revelation that we can easily pull out of that book is this. When it comes to the end times, you want to be on Team Jesus, period. You want to be close and united and connected to and walking in great intimacy with Jesus. Regardless of the end times comes next week, in 10 minutes, or in 100 years, or in 10,000 years, are you walking closely with Jesus? Because if you are, you're already prepared for whenever the end times comes. The truth is, we shouldn't live that differently if we know that the end times are coming in 10 hours. We should live the same way right now. We should be radically committed to Christ. We should be sharing the gospel. We should be loving our neighbors. We should be radically generous. We should be giving to those in need. We should be serving others. We shouldn't live differently because the end times are really close. We should be living as if the end times are in 2 minutes because we never know when it's going to come. And so we want to be loving God, loving others, and making disciples regardless of when the end times are. Let me close with this final thought. Sometimes it's attributed to Karl Barth, sometimes it's attributed to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and sometimes to other theologians. But the idea is this: we should live our Christian lives with one hand holding a newspaper and one hand holding the Bible. We know what's going on, we're aware of what's going on in the world, but we're interpreting it ultimately through the lens of Scripture. Bottom line is this: pursue your relationship with Christ. Love Jesus. Serve others. Make disciples. Share the gospel. Be radically generous. If you're doing that, whenever the end times comes and however the end times come, then you can just say, I was ready because I was doing exactly what God called me to do, so that when you step into his presence in the fullness of time, he will say, well done, my good and faithful servant. All right, blessings to you. Have a great day. Take care.